What if I told you that striking out like 80% of the time could still make you a billionaire? Or that paying $100,000 just to rent, well, a legal crowbar is actually the secret to making an entire fortune virtually invisible?
I mean, it sounds completely absurd on the surface, right? But when you actually map out the architecture of modern ultra-high net worth wealth, those exact mechanics they're basically what hold the entire structure together.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am your host, and it is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026, and we are so glad you're here with us.
And I am the resident researcher here, ready to bring all the data for you today.
Yeah, so our mission today is to decode the modern wealth playbook. We are talking about a massive stack of research just mapping the entire life cycle of wealth, from the psychology of investing and scaling a business to cashing out via corporate networks, optimizing with private credit, legally navigating taxes, and finally protecting those assets in offshore fortresses. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, the overarching theme here is that wealth is no longer a physical castle. We aren't talking about, the Vanderbilts building physical mansions anymore.
Right.
We're talking about an invisible, highly coordinated financial and legal ecosystem. And while, workplace automation, tax loopholes, and offshore trusts might seem like totally separate topics, they are actually deeply intertwined.
Exactly. So whether you are currently building a business, managing your own portfolio, or you're just insanely curious about how the top 0.1% actually operates behind closed doors, we are going to give you some actionable insights today.
Absolutely.
And we have to start at the foundation, right? Before anyone can protect $1 billion, they have to build it. But the biggest hurdle to building that wealth isn't the stock market. It's the founder's own mind.
Yeah, the mechanics of wealth building are actually pretty straightforward. It's the psychology that breaks people.
There is this really fascinating piece of insight from Tony Robbins that caught my eye recently. He points out that investing success is 80% psychology and only 20% mechanics.
Right.
He argues you don't even need to be right all the time. But wait, I have to push back on this. How can you stomach being wrong most of the time and still be a billionaire?
It's a fair question.
It sounds like playing baseball and striking out 80% of the time, but still making the Hall of Fame just because your few hits happen to be grand slams.
Well, the baseball analogy actually holds up perfectly when you look at the math. Research from Nobel laureate William Sharpe demonstrates that to consistently beat the market by, timing your trades, you would need to be right anywhere from 69% to 91% of the time.
Wow, 91%.
Yeah. And human beings just aren't capable of that over decades. The volatility drag will eventually wipe you out.
So the multi-billionaires don't even try to play the market timing game.
They don't. Instead, they focus entirely on Warren Buffett's famous rule number 1, which is protect capital. They set up rigid, systemic rules to manage their emotions so they don't, panic sell during a downturn. They just play the long game.
So if the founder's mind is the first bottleneck in investing, their day-to-day operations are the second bottleneck in business. Think about your own job right now. How many things are you holding on to because you just don't trust anyone else to do them? The research actually calls this the delegation death grip.
And it's a fatal flaw for a growing business. The delegation death grip is when a founder technically assigns a task to an employee, but they hoard the final decision-making power.
Right. They have to approve everything.
Exactly. It means the founder remains the absolute bottleneck for every single workflow. The business can literally only grow as fast as the founder can read their emails.
To break that grip, there's this operational framework from consultant Kamyar Shah that focuses on what he calls the trust deficiency equation.
I love this concept.
It's a simple math, right? Trust in people multiplied by trust in process. Shah uses a 5-level delegation ladder. Level 1 is basically, do exactly what I tell you, but level 5 is act independently and just report the outcomes. But here is where it gets really interesting. This framework for delegating to humans perfectly mirrors how companies are now delegating to AI.
It's the exact same philosophical transition. We were looking at a scaling automation framework from UiPath, and they break this down brilliantly. With humans, you delegate easily reversible decisions using something like a RACI matrix.
Let's define that really quickly for anyone who hasn't suffered through corporate management seminars.
Fair enough.
REI is just an acronym used to map out exactly who is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed on any given task. It just standardizes who makes the call.
Right. It creates a standardized process for humans. And UiPath argues you need an equivalent automation operating model to delegate rote tasks to software. They basically divide this into attended and unattended robots.
Which, just to clarify, attended robots are like a super smart assistant working alongside you. Think of a really advanced spell checker or an autofiller that you trigger yourself. Unattended robots operate completely in the background, entirely on their own, like a script that automatically processes payroll at midnight without a human ever clicking a single button.
Exactly. You are standardizing the process to free up human cognitive capacity. You delegate the mechanics so you can, focus on the vision.
And we see this working in the real world right now. On a recent episode of the Disruptors podcast, entrepreneur Travis Johnson explained how he used systemic delegation to run a real estate business, grossing nearly $2 million. And get this, he only worked 3 hours a day.
That's incredible.
Right. Then you have Cameron Herold, who scaled 1-800-JOT-JANG-AC to $106 million by relentlessly leveraging proper operational systems. They didn't work harder than their competitors. They just built better systems.
But standardizing a business to run without you is really only step one. Let's say you've automated everything. You have this incredibly efficient company. How do you actually achieve a massive liquidity event? Like, how do you cash out?
Right. Because the assumption right now in 2026 is, just adopt AI and the market will reward you with a massive buyout.
Yeah, that's the narrative.
But if we look at recent economic data on past innovation eras, we need a serious reality check on AI profitability. What do the productivity booms of the past actually tell us?
The historical data is incredibly sobering, actually. If you look at the massive productivity boom of the 1960s or the widespread internet rollout of the late 90s and early 2000s, overall economic productivity undeniably rose. Companies definitely got faster.
Okay, yeah.
But the actual profitability gains, those were almost entirely isolated to the tech sector itself.
Wait, so if everyone adopts AI, nobody actually gets a competitive advantage. They just keep treading water while the tech companies get rich.
That is the shovel seller mechanism in action. During a gold rush, the people selling the shovels make the real money. From 2000 to 2005, tech sector profit margins jumped from 10% to 15.7%.
Wow.
Meanwhile, non-tech company margins barely moved. They went from 9.3% to just 10.2%.
Why is there such a massive disconnect?
Because of CapEx, capital expenditure, the non-tech companies are the ones absorbing the massive costs of buying all these new digital tools. They spend millions upgrading their software, which eats their margins today, for a hopeful productivity bump tomorrow.
Oh, I see.
But the tech companies selling the software, they book that spending as pure revenue today.
So if the rising tide of AI doesn't magically make every scaled business massively profitable, how do these founders successfully secure a private equity buyout and get their cash?
They don't rely on tech. They rely on the boardroom. There is a really fascinating working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research that proves the secret to a private equity buyout isn't always just having a stellar balance sheet. It's having a board interlock.
Let's explain this board interlock concept because the statistics here are just wild. The data shows that if a company has a director who has past leveraged buyout experience, meaning they successfully went through a PE deal at another company, that current company is roughly 40% more likely to receive a private equity offer.
A 40% statistical advantage is massive in the financial world. It highlights that high-level financial transactions are dictated by social networks and information pathways.
Right.
A director with past private equity experience already knows the bankers, they know the lawyers, they know how to navigate the very quiet, very complex, preliminary back-channel conversations that have to happen before a formal offer is ever made.
The specific example in the research that really solidified this for me was a guy named Eugene Davis. Back in 2005, he sat on the board of a company called Metals USA when they received a buyout from Apollo Management. So he goes through that entire grueling process. Then later, he serves on the board of Knology Inc. By sitting on Knology's board, he brings that PE link with him. He literally becomes the human information pathway that facilitates future deals.
And once that PE deal goes through, our hypothetical founder has finally cashed out. They navigated the psychology of scaling, dodged the AI profitability trap, and utilized board interlocks to secure a liquidity event. They're sitting on a mountain of cash.
But they don't just stick that cash in a high-yield savings account. That is not how the wealth playbook operates.
Not at all. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where portfolio evolution happens. Recent industry reports, like those from Oliver Wyman, show a massive structural shift toward private credit. Holdings in private credit by wealthy investors have grown 2.5-fold in just the last 3 years.
Because they are utilizing what's called a barbell strategy. Imagine a physical weightlifting barbell. On one end, you have your low-cost, super liquid public bond ETFs. They are safe, predictable, easy to sell. But on the heavy end of the barbell, you load up on higher-yielding, less liquid private credit.
And the reason this is booming right now is the democratization of the space. Historically, private credit, which is just where private entities lend directly to companies instead of going through a traditional bank, that was restricted to massive institutional investors. But now we're seeing the rise of evergreen funds.
And we should clarify what an evergreen fund is. Unlike a traditional private equity fund that locks your money up in a vault for 10 years, an evergreen fund allows you to put money in and periodically take it out. It's a continuous rolling structure.
Exactly. Because of that flexible structure, these funds are dropping their minimum investment requirements to as low as $1,000. It's opening the floodgates. Wealthy individuals now account for roughly 12% of the entire $325 billion to $375 billion private credit market managed by the top firms.
They are essentially acting as their own banks. But it actually goes a layer deeper than just buying private credit. Data coming out of wealth management divisions like RBC shows that ultra-wealthy business owners don't just invest cash.
Oh, definitely not.
They use their accumulated assets as collateral. They pool everything together, right? Their real estate, the cash value of their life insurance, their investment portfolios.
They pool it all to secure highly flexible credit facilities. They get loans tied to standard benchmark rates like LIBOR, or they use short-term debt instruments called bankers' acceptances. The mechanism is really similar to a home equity line of credit, but applied to their entire financial life.
But why go into debt when you have millions in the bank?
Because it allows them to access massive amounts of capital to buy new assets without ever having to sell their current ones.
And if you don't sell, you don't trigger capital gains taxes. You just hold the assets and utilize simple everyday accounting tools like tax loss harvesting along the way, which, if you aren't familiar, is just the practice of selling the losers in your portfolio to claim a loss and using that loss to legally cancel out the taxes you owe on the winners.
But using credit isn't just about freeing up capital for new investments. It is the absolute linchpin of a tax strategy that is dominating economic policy debates right now in 2026.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the concept of buy, borrow, die. Yale's budget lab ran the math on this, and if you were listening to this and wondering why your effective tax rate feels higher than a billionaire's, this math right here is the exact reason why.
The mechanics of buy, borrow, die are striking. Let's say you hold low-basis assets. That just means assets that have grown massively in value since you bought them, like a startup you founded for a few $1,000s that is now worth $100 million.
Okay, makes sense.
If you sell those shares to buy a yacht or fund your lifestyle, you pay a massive capital gains tax. But if you borrow against those shares instead, the money the bank gives you is a loan. And loans are not taxable income.
Right, because debt isn't income, it's money you eventually have to pay back, so you live off the borrowed money tax-free. And then the die part of the strategy kicks in.
Right.
When you pass away and leave those assets to your heirs, the U.S. tax code allows for something called a stepped-up basis.
This is the critical mechanism. The original purchase price of the asset is legally erased. The new cost basis for your heirs becomes the exact value of the asset on the day you died. The entire capital gains liability that built up over your lifetime just legally disappears.
Yale's budget lab estimates that the effective tax rate on borrowing is roughly 12 percentage points lower than the tax rate on actually selling the assets. It's a staggering advantage.
It is, and naturally, this is a massive topic of political debate right now.
And I want to be very clear to you listening right now, we are absolutely not taking a political stance here. We are strictly looking impartially at the 3 targeted reform options currently being debated in Washington to close this tax gap. We're just reporting the math outlined by the Yale researchers.
That's right. The stated goal of these 3 proposals is to neutralize the tax preference for borrowing over selling. Option 1 is called the deemed realization tax.
Okay.
This would essentially treat borrowing against an appreciated asset as if you had actually sold it. It would trigger a taxable event at the standard 23.8% capital gains rate. They estimate this would raise $102 billion over 10 years.
Okay, so then option 2 is the withholding tax. Yes, this is a flat 10% prepayment tax on the actual loan proceeds. You pay it up front when you take out the loan, but it functions as a credit against future capital gains when you eventually do sell the asset or, when the estate is settled at death. That one is estimated to raise $147 billion over a decade.
And finally, option 3 is an annual excise tax. Instead of taxing the new loan when you take it out, this proposes a 0.5% flat tax every single year on the total outstanding balance of the loan.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, this will be administered by the banks and lenders and is estimated to raise $130 billion.
But looking at option 3, if they just slap a tax on the outstanding balance of a loan, wouldn't that hit regular folks who are just borrowing for entirely normal non-tax reasons?
That is the major policy trade-off highlighted in the research, actually. Option 3 is a lot less precise. It leaves the actual tax preference in place for some wealthy folks, but it newly taxes others who are borrowing for legitimate, everyday business or personal reasons.
Got it.
Options 1 and 2, however, are designed with a specific buffer, an annual $250,000 exemption per person. That exemption specifically protects middle-income families and makes the tax highly progressive, ensuring it only targets the ultra-wealthy who are utilizing this specific buy, borrow, die strategy.
So, depending on how this policy debate shakes out, the domestic tax landscape could be shifting dramatically in the coming years. And frankly, with the constant threat of cross-border litigation and shifting tax codes, the ultra-wealthy aren't just relying on domestic strategies anymore.
No, definitely not.
They are building complex international legal moats around their portfolios.
Exactly. Domestic asset protection is no longer viewed as sufficient by the top tier of wealth. Enter the multi-jurisdictional cross-border trust. We reviewed legal materials from specialized firms like Rapid Companies and Nevis Trust, and the legal engineering they use is just formidable.
We're talking about premier offshore jurisdictions here, primarily places like the island of Nevis in the Caribbean or the Cook Islands. The laws in these jurisdictions are practically custom-written to defeat foreign creditors.
It's wild.
For instance, if someone wants to sue a trust established in Nevis, they can't just file a simple lawsuit and hope for a settlement. They have to post a $100,000 bond up front just to commence legal action.
It is entirely designed to freeze out frivolous lawsuits. But the financial barrier is really just the start. The evidentiary barrier is even higher. Let's say a creditor claims you fraudulently transferred money into a Nevis trust just to hide it from them.
Okay.
To prove that, the creditor's standard of proof isn't the typical civil standard of a balance of probabilities. It is beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is insane. That is a criminal standard applied to a civil money issue.
Yeah.
It is incredibly difficult to prove someone's subjective intent beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. And the window to even try is microscopic. There is a strict 1 to 2 year statute of limitations on these claims.
So if we go back to our earlier analogy, it's like a creditor trying to break into a bank vault, but first they have to pay the bank $100,000 just to rent the crowbar.
Yes.
Then they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the money inside shouldn't be there. And, oh, by the way, they only have a brief window before the vault legally disappears completely.
And if a highly motivated creditor actually manages to jump through all those hoops and poses a real threat, these trusts are built with flight provisions.
Flight provisions? I mean, this sounds like something out of a Jason Bourne movie.
It sounds like fiction, but it's a standard legal mechanism down there. If a legal threat materializes in one jurisdiction, the trustee has the legal authority to literally pick up the trust and move it to another protective jurisdiction.
You're kidding?
No. It forces the creditor to start the entire expensive, grueling process all over again under a totally new set of laws in a different country.
And they don't just use a basic trust either. They layer it like armor. They pair a Nevis LLC, which holds the actual physical assets, the real estate, the bank accounts, with a Nevis trust, which legally owns the LLC. This dual-layered defense means they can completely ignore foreign court judgments. A U.S. judge's order means absolutely nothing down there. You have to litigate locally.
And because setting this entire architecture up runs anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000 initially, with very high ongoing annual compliance fees, it functions as an architectural defense system entirely exclusive to the truly wealthy.
It is staggering. We have covered so much ground today. We started with the psychology of scaling a business, beating the delegation death grip, using the trust efficiency equation, and intelligent AI delegation.
Right.
We looked at how founders actually secure a buyout by leveraging the hidden information pathways of board interlocks. We explored how they optimize their newfound wealth using a private credit barbell, how they utilize the buy-borrow-die strategy to legally navigate the tax code, and finally how they shield everything inside the fortress of an offshore Nevis trust. It really is a complete, invisible, and highly coordinated financial architecture. So what does this all mean for you?
It highlights that massive wealth isn't just accumulated by accident, it is meticulously engineered. But looking at all these sources together raises a truly fascinating question about the future of this space. If the wealthy are already using AI to automate their corporate operations, and they are using offshore trusts to automate their legal defense with self-executing flight provisions, what happens when autonomous AI agents are legally appointed as the actual trustees of these multi-jurisdictional entities?
Oh, wow. I hadn't even considered that.
Could we see a near future where global wealth is entirely managed, moved, and protected by non-human intelligence, operating continuously under Nevis law, completely out of the reach of traditional human legal systems and human error?
That is a wild thought to leave on.
Yeah.
A true, invisible, autonomous castle running itself in the cloud. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep asking questions, keep challenging your own assumptions about how the world works, and we'll see you next time.